He could barely walk. Willis Reed sat in the bowels of Madison Square Garden on the night of May 8, 1970, his right thigh shot full of painkillers, and he made a decision that would define him for the rest of his life and beyond it. He was not going to sit out the biggest game he would ever play. He was going to walk. And when he dragged that injured leg out of the tunnel and onto the floor for Game 7 of the NBA Finals, the roar that swallowed the building became one of the most famous sounds in the history of American sport. The man who created that moment was the captain of the New York Knicks. And the truth is that the limp out of the tunnel, as legendary as it became, is only a single chapter in a much larger story. To understand why grown men still get emotional talking about Willis Reed decades later, you have to go back to the beginning. Back to a farm in rural Louisiana where a poor only child grew into one of the toughest and most respected men the game of basketball has ever produced. Willis Reed Jr. was born on June 25, 1942, in Hico, Louisiana. He was raised a short distance away in Bernice, a tiny segregated community in the rural northern part of the state. He was an only child. His father worked as an industrial laborer, and his mother worked as a domestic. By most accounts, young Willis was born on his grandfather's farm, and his childhood was shaped by the rhythms of country life, by fishing and hunting and hard work, and by the realities of growing up black in the segregated American South of the 1940s and the 1950s. This was a world with very little margin for error. There were no shortcuts handed to a poor kid from Bernice. Whatever Willis Reed was going to become, he was going to have to build it himself, with his own hands and his own will. Basketball gave him a path. He attended Westside High School in nearby Lilly, Louisiana, and even as a teenager, it was clear that he was something unusual. He was big, he was strong, and he kept growing. By the time he finished high school, he was a genuine prospect. But the doors that opened for him were not the doors that would have opened for a player of his ability in a different era. The biggest college programs of the time were not exactly falling over themselves to recruit talented young black athletes out of the segregated South. So Reed stayed close to home, and he chose a place that would become central to his identity. He chose Grambling. Grambling State University was a historically black college, and its basketball program was led by a coach named Fred Hobdy, a man who would become hugely important in Reed's development. At Grambling, Reed turned into a dominant force. In 1961, he led the school to the NAIA National Championship, the title contested by smaller colleges outside the major NCAA structure of the day. He would help lead Grambling to a third-place finish in 1963 as well. Over 4 years, he established himself as arguably the finest player ever to come out of a historically black college, a claim that still gets debated today, with names like Earl Monroe entering the conversation. But there is no debate about this. When Reed left Grambling, he was a polished, powerful, supremely skilled big man who could score inside and out, who could rebound, and who could impose himself physically on anyone. The basketball world simply was not paying close enough attention. What made his college years remarkable was not just the production, but the world in which he produced it. The historically black colleges of that era operated in a separate basketball universe, largely ignored by the mainstream press and by the professional scouts, their gyms overlooked, their stars undersold. Coach Fred Hobdy understood exactly what he had in Reed, and he built around him, demanding the footwork and conditioning and discipline that would later define Reed as a professional. Reed spoke warmly over the years about what Grambling gave him, not only as a player, but as a man, an education and a foundation and a sense of belonging that the wider world had been reluctant to offer a poor child from Bernice. He arrived a raw, oversized teenager. He left a complete basketball player. That inattention showed up on draft night. In 1964, the NBA held its draft, and Willis Reed waited. And waited. The first round came and went, and his name was not called. He was not selected until the second round, where the Knicks finally took him with the 8th pick of that round. For a player of his eventual stature, falling that far is almost impossible to imagine. Part of it was the bias of the era against players from small black colleges, the assumption that the competition they faced could not have prepared them for the professional game. Part of it was that, at a shade under 6'10", he was considered a touch undersized to be a true NBA center. Whatever the reasons, the slight stuck with him. Reed never forgot that he had been passed over, that team after team had decided he was not worth a first-round pick. He carried that chip onto the floor every single night of his career, and the rest of the league would pay for the mistake. It did not take long for everyone to realize what New York had stumbled into. In his very first season, the 1964 to 1965 campaign, Reed was a revelation. He poured in points, he crashed the boards, and he played with a physical edge that belied his rookie status. By the end of the year, he was named NBA Rookie of the Year, having averaged close to 20 points and around 15 rebounds per game, numbers that announced him immediately as one of the better big men in the league. That second-round pick, the player nobody wanted in the first round, was now one of the most productive young centers in basketball. It was the first of what would become 7 consecutive All-Star selections, an extraordinary run of sustained excellence. But statistics only tell part of the Willis Reed story. To understand the man, and to understand why opponents feared him and teammates revered him, you have to talk about his toughness. And there is one night that captures it better than any other. It happened at Madison Square Garden in October of 1966, at the start of Reed's 3rd season, his first as the Knicks captain. The opponent, fittingly, was the Los Angeles Lakers, a team that would become Reed's great nemesis over the coming years. Reed had been jostling all night with a Lakers forward named Rudy LaRusso, a tough, physical player in his own right. The two of them had been trading elbows and shoves, the kind of low-post warfare that defined the era. Lined up for a free throw, the simmering tension finally boiled over. There was contact, an elbow, a shove, and LaRusso threw a punch at Reed. The problem for the Lakers was that, in that exact moment, their center Darryl Imhoff had wrapped Reed up in a kind of bear hug from behind, leaving him momentarily defenseless. When Reed broke free, he did not just defend himself, he went off. What followed has become the stuff of legend, and there is actual film of it. Reed flattened Imhoff with a punch. He went after LaRusso, who retreated toward the Lakers bench. A rookie named John Block came at him with his fists up, and Reed dropped him too, leaving him with a bloodied, fractured nose. In the span of a few wild seconds, Willis Reed had essentially taken on the entire Lakers bench by himself and come out the clear winner. A contemporaneous account in the New York Times described Imhoff sprawled in front of the Lakers bench, a bloodied towel pressed to his face, while police restored order among spectators who had spilled onto the court for a better view. Some later retellings, including one from Phil Jackson, claim that Reed broke multiple Lakers' jaws that night. A more graphic version of events that is harder to verify against the original reporting, so treat the most extreme details with caution. What is not in dispute is the essential truth of the moment. One man, surrounded, fought off an entire team, and here is the part that tells you who Reed was. Because his teammate had restrained him during the early part of the scuffle, Reed reportedly warned his teammates from then on to never grab him or hold him back during a fight. The story goes that he had once been hit while a teammate was restraining him during his college days, and he was not going to let that happen again. He would rather face the consequences swinging freely than be held helpless. For a brawl that left multiple players injured and the Garden in chaos, the NBA of that era handed down almost nothing. A minor fine and ejections. League discipline simply was not what it is today. But the message to the rest of the NBA was delivered loud and clear. You did not push Willis Reed around. You did not try to intimidate him. If you started something with the Knicks captain, you had better be ready to finish it, because he most certainly would. That toughness became the foundation of something special in New York. Around Reed, the Knicks were building one of the most beloved teams in the history of the sport. The roster filled out with names that would all eventually reach the Hall of Fame. There was Walt Frazier, the impossibly cool guard they called Clyde, a defensive genius and a clutch scorer. There was DeBusschere, the rugged forward acquired in a trade that reshaped the franchise. There was Bill Bradley, the cerebral Princeton man and future United States Senator. Earlier, an arrangement that had Reed splitting time at center and power forward gave way to a clearer structure, and after the Knicks traded for veteran big man Walt Bellamy and later reshuffled their front line, Reed settled firmly into the role that suited him. Holding it all together on the bench was Red Holtzman, a coach who preached defense, unselfishness, and finding the open man. It was a team built on intelligence and movement, on hitting the open teammate and helping on defense. And at the center of all of it, literally and figuratively, was the captain. Bill Bradley, who would go on to a career in politics, later wrote about what Reed meant to that locker room. He described Reed as the one who would speak up, the one the other players looked to, a leader who could counsel a frustrated teammate one moment and dominate the opposition the next. Reed was the player boss, the man who carried the authority of the room while still keeping a respectful distance from management. A team, the thinking went, is only as strong as its big man, and a great center has to be willing to fight for his teammates, or at least convince the other team that he will. Willis Reed never had any trouble convincing anyone of that. That Knicks team became something more than a basketball club. In a city that prides itself on toughness and intelligence, the Knicks of this era played a brand of basketball that New Yorkers fell completely in love with. All crisp passing and relentless team defense and selfless movement. 5 men operating as a single organism. They were not the most physically gifted collection ever assembled, but they were perhaps the smartest, and they were certainly among the most unselfish. The Garden became the center of the basketball world, and Reed was its beating heart, the immovable presence in the middle who set the tone for everything around him. When the captain dove for a loose ball, everyone dove. When the captain took a charge, everyone took a charge. On that team, leadership was contagious. Everything came together in the 1969 to 1970 season, the greatest individual campaign of Reed's career. He was simply magnificent. He led the Knicks to the best record in the league, anchoring a team that played a brand of basketball New York had never seen. That year, Reed accomplished something that had never been done before. He was named Most Valuable Player of the All-Star Game. He was named Most Valuable Player of the regular season. And he was about to add a third honor that would complete the set. The Knicks marched through the playoffs and into the NBA Finals, where waiting for them, as always, were the Los Angeles Lakers, a star-studded juggernaut built around 3 of the greatest players in the history of the game. Wilt Chamberlain, the most physically dominant force the sport had ever seen. Jerry West, the brilliant guard whose silhouette would become the NBA logo itself. And Elgin Baylor, one of the most gifted scorers of all time. The series would become an instant classic. It swung back and forth. There was a Game 3 that the Knicks appeared to have won on a late shot, only for Jerry West to launch and somehow make an impossible heave from beyond 60 feet at the buzzer to force overtime, a shot that today would have counted for 3 points, but in that era only tied the game. New York survived that one in the extra session. The Lakers answered. Back and forth they went, 2 great teams trading blows. And then came Game 5, and the moment that nearly ended everything for the Knicks. In the course of that game, Reed went down. He had suffered a serious tear in his right thigh, an injury most often described as a torn muscle, and likely a tear of the quadriceps. He could not continue. And yet, somehow, with their captain on the sideline, the Knicks gutted out a Game 5 victory to take a 3-2 lead in the series. They were now 1 win away from the first championship in franchise history. There was only one problem. It looked as though they would have to win that final game without the heart and soul of their team. Game 6 confirmed the worst fears of every Knicks fan. Without Reed to body him up, Wilt Chamberlain was utterly unstoppable. He poured in 45 points and grabbed 27 rebounds, a colossal performance, and the Lakers blew the Knicks out to even the series at 3 games apiece. Now it all came down to a single game. Game 7, winner take all at Madison Square Garden for the championship of the world. And nobody, not the fans, not the media, not even his own teammates, knew whether Willis Reed would be able to play. In the hours before tip-off, Reed sat in the trainer's room while the doctors worked on his leg. The thigh was not responding the way anyone hoped. By the standards of modern medicine, a player with that kind of muscle tear would be shut down for weeks, his season over. But Reed was insistent. He would later describe the thinking behind his decision in simple, unforgettable terms. Paraphrased here. He did not want to spend the rest of his life looking back and wishing he had tried to play in the biggest game of his career. He did not want to look in the mirror 20 years later and live with that regret. So he took an injection to dull the pain. A needle straight into the damaged muscle, and he prepared to do something his body was begging him not to do. When the teams came out for warm-ups, Reed was not among his teammates. The Knicks stretched and shot without their captain, the building thick with uncertainty. Bill Bradley would later recall that they left the locker room not knowing whether Willis would join them at all. And then, with the clock ticking down toward tip-off, a figure appeared in the tunnel. Willis Reed, dragging his bad leg, limping but upright, walked out onto the Madison Square Garden floor. The crowd, already on edge, detonated. The noise was so overwhelming that one photographer would describe it as the loudest sound he had ever heard. On the other end of the floor, the Lakers stopped warming up to stare. Wilt Chamberlain and Jerry West and the rest of them simply watched, a look on their faces that said they could not quite believe what they were seeing. Walt Frazier later said that the moment he saw the reaction of the Lakers, something told him the Knicks might just have them. What happened next sealed the legend. Reed could barely move. He had no business being out there. But on the opening possession, he rose up and knocked down a jump shot from the top of the key. The first basket of the game. Moments later, he scored again from the outside, the second basket of the game. The Garden was a madhouse. Those 2 baskets were the only points Willis Reed would score all night. He finished with just 4 points. But the points were never the point. His presence transformed everything. His teammates, lifted by the sight of their captain refusing to quit, played out of their minds. And the man who truly won that game was Walt Frazier, who delivered one of the greatest and most overlooked performances in the history of the finals, pouring in 36 points and dishing out 19 assists while controlling the entire flow of the game. Reed, for his part, did what he could on defense, bothering Chamberlain, making him work, occupying him even on one good leg. The Knicks built a massive lead in the first half and never let go. When the final buzzer sounded, the score was 113-99, and the New York Knicks were NBA champions for the first time in their history. It was the franchise's first title, won in the most dramatic fashion imaginable, and it has been known ever since simply as the Willis Reed game. Reed was named Most Valuable Player of the Finals, completing a sweep of the 3 major MVP awards in a single season, an achievement of staggering rarity. All-Star Game MVP, regular season MVP, and Finals MVP, all in 1 year. The undersized second-round pick from a small black college in Louisiana now sat on top of the basketball world. But greatness in this game always comes at a cost, and for Willis Reed, the bill was already coming due. The same toughness that made him willing to play on a torn thigh was, in a way, part of what wore his body down. Knees, in particular, are unforgiving for big men who play with that kind of physicality, and Reed's were beginning to betray him. The years of banging with Chamberlain and every other behemoth in the league were taking their toll. The Knicks remained a power, but the Lakers were not done with them. In the 1972 finals, the two rivals met again, and this time it was Los Angeles that prevailed, beating New York in 5 games to claim the title. For Reed and the Knicks, it stung, but it set up one final act of redemption. In the 1972 to 1973 season, the Knicks reloaded. The roster, already loaded with Hall of Fame talent, added even more. Earl Monroe, the same Earl Monroe sometimes mentioned alongside Reed in the conversation about the greatest players from historically black colleges, was now in the backcourt with Frazier, forming one of the most talented guard tandems imaginable. The veteran big man, Jerry Lucas, added scoring and savvy. And once again the Knicks fought their way to the finals, and once again the Los Angeles Lakers were waiting. This time, the result was different. New York beat Los Angeles in 5 games to win the second championship in franchise history. And Willis Reed, the captain, was named Finals Most Valuable Player for the second time in his career. 2 titles, 2 Finals Most Valuable Player awards. He had now twice been judged the best player on the floor in the games that mattered most. That 1973 championship would be the high point of the end of his career. His body simply had no more to give. The knee problems that had been building for years finally overwhelmed him. In the 1973 to 1974 season, Reed managed to play only 19 games before the pain made it impossible to continue. He retired in 1974 at the age of 31 after 10 seasons, every single one of them in a New York Knicks uniform. He had never played for another team, and he never would. He finished his career with 12,183 points and 8,414 rebounds, averaging 18.7 points and 12.9 rebounds per game over his career. Numbers that still place him among the greatest players in the history of the franchise. It is worth pausing on how brief his career actually was. 10 seasons, and really fewer than that at full strength, cut short at an age when many great big men are only entering their prime. There is an entire alternate history in which Reed's knees hold up, and he plays another 5 or 6 years, piling up the kind of cumulative numbers that modern fans use to rank the all-time greats. But Reed never measured himself that way, and neither did the people who watched him. He was judged on impact, on leadership, on the moments when the games mattered most, and by that measure his record is nearly flawless. Quality over quantity, rings over raw totals. The verdict of his peers was unanimous. The honors came quickly, and they kept coming. In 1976, the Knicks retired his number 19, the first number the franchise ever lifted to the rafters. Think about that for a moment. In a storied organization full of legends, Willis Reed was the very first man they chose to immortalize. He was elected to the Naismith Memorial Basketball Hall of Fame and enshrined in 1982. In the 1990s, as the NBA celebrated its 50th anniversary, Reed was named to the list of the 50 greatest players in league history. And decades later, in 2021, when the league marked its 75th anniversary with an updated list of its all-time greats, Willis Reed's name was once again included. 2 anniversary teams, a generation apart, both recognizing the same essential truth. This was one of the best to ever do it. But unlike many great players, Reed's story did not end when he stopped playing. He stayed in the game for decades more, building a second career that was, in its own quieter way, just as impressive as his first. He returned to the Knicks as a head coach in 1977, and in his first full campaign, he guided the team to a playoff berth in the 1977 to 1978 season. The following year did not go as well, and his time on the New York bench ended only a handful of games into the season. Coaching, it turned out, would be a winding road for him. He took a job as an assistant coach at St. John's University, and then became the head coach at Creighton University in Omaha, Nebraska. He led the Creighton Blue Jays for 4 seasons in the early 1980s, slowly building the program up, improving the win totals each year and reaching the National Invitation Tournament with his 1983 to 1984 team. Among the players he recruited and coached at Creighton was a 7-footer named Benoit Benjamin, who would go on to a long NBA career and who would later be reunited with Reed in the professional ranks. After Creighton, Reed returned to the NBA as an assistant, spending 2 years working alongside Mike Fratello with the Atlanta Hawks, and then a stint as an assistant with the Sacramento Kings. In 1988, he got another shot at being an NBA head coach when he took over a struggling New Jersey Nets team midway through the season. The situation was difficult, the roster thin, and the results reflected it. He coached the Nets through that lean stretch and then for the following full season. But the wins were hard to come by, and it became clear that Reed's greatest impact on a franchise might not come from the sideline at all. It came from the front office. And this is the part of Willis Reed's story that often gets overlooked, because it does not have the drama of a man limping out of a tunnel. After moving into the Nets front office at the end of the 1980s, Reed rose to become the team's general manager in 1993. And in that role, he proved to have a sharp eye for talent and a real gift for building a roster. He drafted Derek Coleman and Kenny Anderson, 2 players who became all-stars and gave the franchise its identity for years. He pulled off a coup by luring the respected veteran coach Chuck Daly, fresh off championships in Detroit and a gold medal with the original Dream Team, to come coach his team. Under Reed's stewardship, a franchise that had been adrift made multiple consecutive playoff appearances and turned into a genuine contender in the Eastern Conference. In 1996, he moved up to Senior Vice President of Basketball Operations, continuing the work of building the Nets into something durable. He spent more than 15 years with that organization in various roles. And the foundation he helped lay contributed to the eventual rise of the franchise. Later, before the 2003 to 2004 season, he crossed the river to join the front office of the Knicks, returning to the organization where it had all begun. It was a different kind of basketball intelligence than the one he had shown on the court, but it came from the same place. The same eye that could read a defense in a split second could read a draft board and a roster. The same understanding of what makes a team greater than the sum of its parts, learned under Red Holtzman and lived out alongside Frazier, DeBusschere and Bradley, now guided the decisions he made from behind a desk. Reed knew what a winning culture looked like because he had been at the very center of one, and he spent his executive years trying to build that same feeling for a new generation of players. Through all of it, the playing and the coaching and the executive work, the people who knew Willis Reed kept describing the same kind of man. Not the ferocious brawler from the 1966 footage, but a deeply decent, generous, humble person. He was known for shunning the spotlight, for being uncomfortable with too much attention on himself, for letting his work and his presence speak instead of his words. One longtime colleague from his front office days remembered that Reed always carried a blue marker and a stack of old photographs from his playing days, and that he would never turn down a fan, never refuse to sign something, never fail to give a little piece of himself to someone who admired him. He believed in giving back, particularly to people who had less than he did, the kind of people he had grown up among in rural Louisiana. The captain, even in retirement, was still a captain in the way that mattered most. He looked after people. In his home state, the place that shaped him, the recognition finally arrived in full. In 2022, Grambling State retired his jersey number and named the court at its arena in his honor, a fitting tribute from the school that had taken a chance on a poor kid from Benice when the bigger programs would not. Willis Reed died on March 21, 2023 in Houston, Texas. He was 80 years old. His passing was announced by the National Basketball Retired Players Association, which confirmed it through his family. The official cause was not publicly released, though Reed had been in poor health in his final stretch, and reports at the time suggested he had been dealing with congestive heart problems, so the specifics of his final illness should be understood as not fully confirmed. He had been too unwell to travel to New York just weeks earlier when the Knicks honored the 50th anniversary of that 1973 championship team. The tributes poured in from every corner of the basketball world. The Knicks called him their beloved captain and spoke of the leadership, the sacrifice, and the work ethic that defined him as a champion among champions. The NBA commissioner called his comeback in Game 7 of the 1970 finals one of the most iconic moments in all of sports. Former players and coaches remembered him not just as a great competitor, but as a great man, a leader, a winner, and someone who treated people with kindness. So what is the legacy of Willis Reed? It is tempting to reduce it to a single image. The limp out of the tunnel, the 2 jump shots, the deafening roar of a sold-out Garden. And that moment absolutely deserves its place in history, because it captured something pure about sport, the willingness to sacrifice your own body for your team and for the people counting on you. But to stop there is to miss the larger truth. Willis Reed was the player nobody wanted in the first round, who became a Rookie of the Year, a 7-time All-Star, a regular season MVP, a 2-time champion, and a 2-time Finals MVP. He was the undersized center who fought an entire bench by himself and never once let anyone believe he could be pushed around. He was the leader his Hall of Fame teammates looked to in the hardest moments. And he was the humble man who spent decades after his playing days giving back to the game and to the people in it. He came from almost nothing, a farm in a segregated corner of Louisiana, and through toughness and intelligence and an unbreakable will, he became one of the defining figures of an entire era of basketball. They called him the captain, not because of a letter on a jersey, but because of who he was. The man who would not look in the mirror and live with regret. The man who walked out of that tunnel when his body told him to stay down. Like and subscribe for more hard-hitting basketball documentaries. Until next time.